Alright, in this video I'm going to be going over how to create a floodplain connectivity layer. This is definitely one of the more time-consuming and complicated processes we have to do in any of the tools. So to start off, you need your valley bottom layer. This is the Klickitat Huck ID, like we've been doing in our other videos. So you start off with the valley bottom layer, and basically the simplest way to start is wherever it's located, just right click in your directory and copy it and then paste in that folder. So you're going to have a valley bottom edited, a valley bottom edited copy. And so I'm just going to rename this to what we've decided, which is the Huck ID and then FP underscore connectivity. So I'm going to get rid of the actual valley bottom one out of my window, and I'll bring in the one that I just renamed as the floodplain connectivity. So other than this, the other inputs you'll need, the NHD layer, it just helps you later decide which areas are connected and which areas are disconnected. You need a roads layer that encompasses the whole network, and if it's necessary, the railroad, and it looks like there is a little bit of railroad through this portion of the watershed, so we'll use that too. So to get those data sets, the most standardized place you can go to get those is from the census, because this is nationwide data. So if you just Google Tiger Roads, go to this website, you'll go to the most current year, go to download, web interface, and you'll select roads. For this case, we want all roads, so this includes dirt roads and all sorts of things like that. So it's good for the headwater areas to show that there actually is an impact, where it's just primary and secondary roads, it's not going to have those. So although the impact might not be huge, it's still, in the final output, it's going to show that these roads do have an impact on the floodplain. So you select by the state, and then you're going to have to, if your watershed goes through multiple counties, you're going to have to download both the counties. So it's kind of a little pain that way, that you have to download more than one file. And you can get railroads from this same area. Right there, rails. And this usually is just the whole nation. So that's where you get the data from. I've gone and I have a whole roads layer for the whole CRB, so I will just use that. So the first step that you need to do, we'll turn this off. You're going to start editing the floodplain connectivity layer. So now we're editing. You're just going to kind of get your full watershed in view. You're going to turn that off. You're going to turn your roads on and basically select your whole screen. So now those roads are selected. We'll turn this back on to make sure, and it looks like we got everything taken care of. You're going to go up here to your editor toolbar and hit split polygons. Make sure the target is the floodplain connectivity layer and hit OK. Okay, so the polygons have been split. Oh, still going actually. Alright, so the polygon has been split by the roads layer. So if you zoom into an area, turn on your roads, you can see that it has split that. And you'll notice that if a road doesn't cut through and then cut back out, say like this when it ends inside the polygon, it doesn't actually create that line. So there's some extra processing steps later where you're going to have to leave the roads layer on and actually make some manual cuts, because it's not a perfect process, but this is the best we can get at. So then you also had railroads, so we'll turn on that, turn this off real quick, and it looks like it's just this portion right here, so I'm just going to select that, turn the layer back on, and hit split again. Alright, so now that that's done, we're good with splitting the polygon. So now what you're going to do is determine which portions are disconnected which portions of the network don't have access to certain polygons now. So since we've split, you can see here's our NHD stream network. So you can see that these polygons are separated. So because of this road or railroad, whatever it is, this portion of the stream no longer has access to that. So how we deal with that is in the attribute table of the floodplain connectivity layer. We have to not be editing anymore. Save edits. Stop editing. So in here we're going to add a field, and you're just going to call it connected. Just leave it as a short integer. So now what you're going to do is go to selection, select by location, and we want to select portions of the floodplain connectivity layer. So we'll select that intersects the perennial network. So now every polygon that has NHD line network running through it is selected. So these are sections that are still connected to the actual stream. I'm just going to open the attribute table, and as you can see, they're all selected. So basically we want to give the ones that are still connected a value of 1, and the ones that are disconnected we'll just leave as 0. So there's two ways that you can go about doing this. We have 1,600 records that we need to change. You can either start editing and manually change those to a 1, but that would take a long time, so I'm going to show you another process you can do. Okay, so this script right here is going to, basically it's just this section right here. We're going to type this in the Python part of ARC, and it will update all of those together. So if you want to screenshot this to use later, this is basically the syntax that you'll use. The only thing you're going to change is the name of your layer and then connected. When you type this in, you got to make sure everything's formatted the same, that there's no like mess ups in capitalization or anything. So screenshot this, it'll become very useful. Keep it somewhere. So I'm going to type this in right now. So where you're going to do it is up here, and I will start typing that in. Okay, so if you look at this, I've gotten to this point, name of layer, it's my floodplain connectivity, and connected, I put that in there. That's the field that I added into the connectivity layer. So basically, this is one row, you hit enter, you type in this row, you hit enter, it brings you down indented, you hit enter, type this and hit enter. So now you get to this point and you have to enter twice to get back. Then you're going to delete row, hit enter, delete cursor, hit enter. Okay, so I've typed that in. It hasn't shown up there. We'll just exit out and open that back up. So now it's changed all those ones to, or all those zeros to ones, and it's left all our unselected ones at zeros. So if we just go into this layer, we'll go to categories and display by categories. And I like to use some lighter, less harsh colors for these. Okay, so basically what we have is 591 polygons that are disconnected and 1692 that are connected. So if we change the symbology there, you can actually we'll go in and see that. So here's our stream network. Change that color so it's a little more. Stream network, polygon or line moving through areas that it's connected, and we have areas of disconnection. But there's also a large sequence of edits that we have to make because we're thinking of lateral connectivity. So, you know, this is the upward section of our stream. It's flowing this way to this downward end. We're just looking at this section. So this whole polygon is considered connected because it has a line network running through it. But if you look at the valley bottom, this whole portion that's still saying is connected is not part of this stream's floodplain. It's a lateral. If we're looking at laterally, this portion of the floodplain belongs to this segment. So technically this is disconnected. So we have to go through the whole network and find areas like this and actually edit the polygon and fix these problems. So I'll go over different scenarios of what you might have to fix here coming up. Okay, so I'm going to start at the bottom of the watershed and just work my way up each arm until I'm finished. So like I said, this can be a pretty time-consuming process, but you want to be in an editing session for the layer. And one of the first scenarios you'll come across is just a simple, and we actually want to have this roads layer on. I'm going to make the roads black, and I'll make the railroads red or something really noticeable. So we want this on because, like I showed you earlier, sometimes a road will come in and then not come back out, and that road won't actually get captured when we split the polygons. So if you leave the road network on, you're going to see that sort of thing, so you can make the edits necessary in those cases. And in some areas where you don't have a lot of roads, rather than stay at a zoomed level and look through the whole thing, you can just go to the areas where you know have roads, and it looks like it's pretty much our whole watershed. But say like this upper portion, I can see that the road ends right here, so I'm not even going to bother looking at any of this. It would just be a waste of time. So that's one of the reasons it's nice to just keep the whole roads layer on. So I'll go back to the bottom of the watershed and talk about that first example that I had mentioned. So anytime you have a road or railroad crossing a river perpendicularly, there's technically no lateral disconnection. But if you think about it, there's going to be some sort of infrastructure where the stream crosses under to keep the river going there, because it can cause a lot of damage if it chooses to migrate, and maybe it's hitting the dike or the crossing here. So they're always going to have some form of infrastructure that's going to keep the road pin there. So it kind of does impact the floodplain a little bit. And this is more important in the headwater areas where it's confined. You don't need to worry about this in the really big unconfined valleys. But so what you're going to do is you're going to use your editor toolbar, and you're going to use the cut polygons tool, And in these cases where there's a perpendicular crossing, just at one of the corners you're going to make a little cut. And that's just going, when the tool runs to the FIS, it's just going to find that small disconnected portion, and it's going to act as a proxy for there's some form of harm going on to the floodplain. So there's an impact there. So anyways, I've cut that. The best way to go about doing this is to just have a small window here off to the side. When you've made the cut, just select that small polygon, go over here, change it to a 0, the color changes. So I got another perpendicular crossing here. I'm going to do that same thing, select the polygon, change it to a 0. Alright, here's another example. This is a crossing that's more exaggerated than just perpendicular. So if we're looking at the stream, you always got to think of which way the stream's moving. So if it's coming from this upstream end, moving down this way, there's some sort of infrastructure probably keeping it from not messing up the road, the entire road crossing. So there's probably a culvert there or something, so that's where the road's going to go through. Upstream it can migrate maybe, and then it comes in there, but once it comes out here, the river's never going to move back up into here. So this little area is, you could say it's disconnected. This isn't a very extreme example, so I'm just going to make a small cut here, just be a little conservative. And these don't have to be perfect, because we're just getting at like a general idea of connectivity. I mean, we can't be super specific because these road layers are imperfect, the line network's imperfect, but if we capture the overall general trend, we'll end up pretty good. So here's a pretty good example of why we edit afterwards. So we have the stream coming down along here, but then it crosses, this is all considered one polygon, so the whole thing got, when I selected by polygons that, you know, had the NHD network pass through them, it crosses through it, and so you can see there's this whole section of disconnected that's considered connected because the stream crosses back into it here. So this is a more extreme example of basically what I just showed you. Right where it crosses, everything upstream of this point no longer has lateral connectivity. The stream can't adjust into here because there's a road. But once it crosses down here, it has access to all this. And so we made that cut, we'll select that, turn it to a 0. You could say, however, that once it crosses through, it no longer has access to any of this. Yeah, maybe some water can overflow and leak down there, but the lateral connectivity to this portion of the stream is no longer there. So I'm going to make a cut there as well. Alright, moving on to another example, pretty important one. So we got a railroad cutting through here, we got some streams coming in, and this is our main stream channel. This bigger valley bottom, that belongs to this stream, where these smaller tributaries, you know, they have a much smaller floodplain. You're not gonna expect this stream within its valley to be able to move clear over here. So we have an issue where, you know, because of how we select pieces of the polygon by where they intersect. You know, we got this portion, this, we'll say this greater area right here is saying it's still connected, but if this big portion of the valley bottom belongs to this stream, it's not connected anymore. This stream could not migrate past this point, but this river's not going to migrate upstream, or this tributary. It doesn't have that capacity. So these are some of the more important cuts you'll be making. Just make a, you know, you can use imagery to kind of validate it, but I just go with a general, you know, I don't know, 10, 15 meters away from the stream for these smaller tributaries. I'm going to make a cut there, and I think it's safe to say that that's probably the range of that stream's floodplain. where the rest of this belongs to this main tribute or this main stem stream. So now that that's cut, you can go ahead and disconnect it, and that tells a lot more accurate story of the connectivity of the floodplain. You know, this was never up here, but now it is disconnected because this stream can't move into there, where before it was reflecting that it was connected. So we got a similar situation here. This portion of the floodplain belongs to this, or maybe this stream, but it doesn't belong to this little tributary flowing through. So I'm just going to make a pretty generalized cut and disconnect that. So you'll have a lot of these tributary cutoffs. That's usually where a lot of the edits are going to occur. Here's another good example of something you'll come across. A lot of the times you'll have a road going right up these tributaries, but it's just crisscrossing back and forth. So it's showing that they're all connected, but you have this whole section here that the river can't get to because there's a road. So you're going to have to make these cuts back and forth to show that. So I'm going to make one there where it crosses. I'm going to make one here where this tributary flows in. So now we've reflected that disconnection, but the road comes back across. So we need to make a cut there, and need to make a cut there to capture that little section. The road crosses back over, make a little cut there. And so now we've captured those disconnections that weren't captured before, just because the way that the line network moves through and crisscrosses. Always keep an eye out for these, just these little slivers that might poke down, where you're having to make an indication for perpendicular cuts anyways, like these, where you're just showing that because of that road crossing, even though there's technically nothing disconnected, it's having the impact on the floodplain. So since you're taking care of those already, these ones kind of just make it more straightforward, where, you know, we're just cutting off that portion that has no lateral connectivity to that. There will be a lot of those. There's a lot of roads that run down like that. So a lot of the times they'll be more exaggerated too, where say it crosses and it runs all the way down here and then goes out. So you have this whole chunk that's showing it's connected because it doesn't cross through here either. So you just make a cut across like I just did, and you'll be able to cut off that whole section that's running parallel to the river. Alright, here's a good example of a kind of confusing thing we got going on. So, you know, we got the main stem here, we got this tributary coming in, and we got this one coming in. We kind of have this section that you know, what do you do with that? Do you leave it how it is, because technically it has these streams running through it, but I would say no. This one is not going to move clear up here, this one's not going to move clear down here, and this portion overall is probably part of this wider. So I'm going to cut that section out right there, just a general area, nothing too particular. So here's an example of something you'll come across a lot when there's an interstate and a railroad running alongside the river, or running through the valley bottom. You'll get these really close sections where there's multiple roads crossing. So even though the stream's going through this polygon and it has that lateral connectivity, the fact that it's going through a culvert here and a culvert here is basically pinning the river to that section. It's never going to have the capacity to adjust. So when you have these super close road crossings, I'll make like a cut like this to just say this portion of the floodplain is never really going to have true connectivity with that because the river has no means of adjusting. Even though it's not cutting it off by a road that's running parallel, it's cut off because it's basically pinned there. This one's a little bit bigger, and there's a decent amount of distance there. You know, maybe the river one day moves there and there, so I'm going to leave that one how it is. But then you got this little portion in the back that, you know, if the river's coming in this culvert here, you know, it's not really ever going to get down here, especially from here. So there is a road cutting this portion off from crossing there, so I'll cut that off. And another good example here of some things to watch out for. You know, we got these two tributaries coming in here, but this is the main stem river and this is the main stem's valley. So we got this whole section here that is still being defined as connected because it has these running through it, but basically once you get to this point here, the river doesn't have connectivity over there, so we're going to cut that off. Same deal going on up here. It's connected because it's all part of this greater polygon, but the river's not going to be able to move into that, so we're just going to cut it like right there. So here's a good example of how messy it can get, especially when you're going through a super populated area. You just kind of make your best judgment call that you can. So basically you're going to run into a lot of scenarios, and this video is probably not going to cover all of them just from the examples I have to work with. But here's a good example of an edit that could be made. So if I turn the roads off, like I said, that road didn't cut all the way through that polygon, so it's not going to show up. So that's why I edit with the roads on. The stream coming in here, it's never going to, you know, if it does come in here, it's got to come back out before it hits that road. So basically this whole area is connected, but it's not capturing that road in our polygon, so you can make a cut all the way like this. And I mean, you could probably even come over here, because honestly, with the stream going under that culvert there and moving downstream in this direction, it's probably not going to come over here. It maybe used to be able to, but now that this road's I'm just going to play it safe and go there. Same with this here. So we got a road coming in here. The river's kind of running parallel to it, but I don't have any line network showing that road, so I'm going to just cut to the end of that road and over, and then disconnect that. You got another little section right here. Due to this being this portion of land pinched between railroad and road, you know, this is never really going to have access to anything. So you can see all these different cases that you'll you know, come and have an issue with. Look for another example to show you just something that's pretty common. So here's an example of one of those situations I was telling you about earlier, where say the road comes in, crosses the river, and then runs parallel to it and goes back out. I had to make this cut right here to capture the disconnectivity right there, because the road just came in one end and out the other. It didn't really have it. If there's a road junction that crossed here, you wouldn't have to disconnect it because it'd already be disconnected, but in this case it wasn't, so I had to make a cut and turn that to a 0. Here's another good example of why you edit with the roads layer on. So this is already pre-edited, so it would be hard to tell, but before I made the cut, there would just be this circle right here would be disconnected, but all this would be yellow and classified as connected. So if I turn the road layer on, it just has a road coming in and then circling there, but it doesn't come back out anywhere else. So this whole section in here would be considered connected. So what I did was I just selected this greater polygon and made a cut, kind of just following the shape of the road, and then went into there and then cut back out so that I could select this inside area and change it to a 0. Because before, this is what it looked like, and there was no cuts that I made. So I went in there, cut it, and changed it to a 0. And I think the last thing I'll go over, like I said, you're gonna run into stuff that I didn't cover on this video, but the main things to think about are which direction the river's moving, and you're looking more laterally than you are longitudinally, and you're thinking about, okay, where could this river have the capacity to adjust to, but what is now limiting it from doing that, which is generally roads and railroads. So here's a case where I know for a fact that this used to be classified as connected because the stream network actually bumps into that polygon. But just, if it's just a tiny corner going in, just disconnect it. I mean, it's safe enough to say that there could be error in the line network, the road network, that, a tiny corner is not enough to justify as connected. And you'll see that a lot with some of these, like small headwaters will have a road that's just like right in the valley bottom, crisscrossing over and over. Sometimes it will go a really long way on the side of it and then just dip in a little bit and come back out, and so it's being classified as connected. But that little dip, you have this huge section that's disconnected, so that one little dip isn't enough to justify it, to keep it connected, so you just change it to disconnected. Or sometimes you actually get the road crossing back and forth over and over again, and you'll just have to make these little, I'll try and find an example. They're basically little double cuts every time the road crosses and then crosses back. There's a little portion on the other side that's disconnected. So here's an example of what I was just talking about. We got the road coming over, running parallel, then crossing, then running parallel on this side, then crossing back over. So in this case, you can see where I made my cuts. I cut right there, disconnected this parallel portion, but then the road crosses, comes back in, and then I had to make a cut right there so that I could cut off this parallel portion, and then it crosses again, and I had to make a cut right there to cut off this parallel portion. Here's an example of what I was talking about earlier, where say the NHD line just crosses a little bit in, but for the most part it's running parallel to this other road, so I just selected that whole thing and cut it off. Here's a section kind of similar to what I was just talking about, where the road and the stream are kind of intermingling with each other. I mean, I could make a cut there and make a cut there and cut that section off where it crosses over, but I mean, you kind of this is where you decide if they're sitting there like crisscrossing each other close enough. There's probably because there's an error in one of the networks, so I just usually don't bother with those sections where the road and NHD line are just right real close with each other. I usually don't mess with those areas as much, but spots like this where it's more obvious, definitely disconnect those. I think that basically covers everything. There's pretty big learning curve to it because there's so many different types of scenarios, and like I said, I probably didn't get them all covered here, but I feel like the more you do, the more you'll understand it. And the biggest takeaways are just, look for these areas like this where, the river's flowing this way, it goes through a culvert, it's laterally disconnected from here, the river's not going to come down and wrap back upstream and come back down. Like, you need to cut that off because it's not connected to this portion of the stream anymore. Make sure in the narrower sections that wherever there's a crossing like this, perpendicular crossing, you cut a little triangle just to show there's some form of impact. You can see I did one there, I did one there. The only place you don't need to worry about those is like in these big unconfined valleys. Like I don't have any sort of triangle to show that there's an impact here, you know. Generally in these big valleys there's already impact with agriculture and stuff anyway, so but it's basically I'll show you what the output looks like and explain why we do it that way. Okay, so with the final RCA output, this is what you're looking at. So what I was talking about with those little making those tiny disconnections at the road crossings, especially in the confined streams, is to make a differentiation between these two portions of the symbology. So there's confined unimpacted or confined impacted. So say you're looking at a perpendicular road crossing. We will find one here. Turn on the roads. Okay, right here. So I've cut that little portion there. And this section is actually classified as confined unimpacted. So maybe that's not enough to classify as impacted. We do have an impacted one over here. And there's two lateral road crossings. And you can see those two little disconnections. So if we didn't account for those little road crossings and cut that little portion off, if there was no other, the model also looks at land use intensity and land use itself. And so if there weren't any uses, the only thing it's going to look at to decide whether to classify that as unimpacted or impacted is a road and or the connectivity layer. And so it's actually impacted because it found these two little polygons there saying it's cut off. So that's why we do those, and that's why you need to include those little cuts basically at every stream crossing, is so that we can account for those areas that may not have any other form of land use or land disruption, but the road itself is impacting that section of stream. That should do it. If you have any questions, let me know.